This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria.
Welcome to Grief Relief. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host and daughter,
Dr. Heidi Horsley. We are going to talk today, like you said, about resilience in a time of grief. Within 17 months, award-winning journalist and author Jill Smolowe lost her husband, sister, mother, and mother-in-law. Jill is a senior writer for People magazine, desiring to help others. She used her experience to write 4 funerals and a wedding, Resilience in a Time of Grief. Jill then became a grief and transition coach, helping clients learn how to restore momentum to their lives. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I was really interested in reading your book and reading about the sweetness between you and your husband. I really enjoyed that part. And he was an award-winning journalist himself, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And so he got leukemia, and he was ill for how many years?
It was 2.5 years from his diagnosis to his death.
And your daughter, you have a daughter, Becky, and I want to read something you wrote in your book because I think it's very interesting. You say in your book that through the last 5 years, neither my needs nor my behavior have matched the American cultural script for exhausted caregivers, broken-hearted widows, and grieving family members. So you did not match that model. In fact, with all this loss, that model kind of annoyed you, right?
Yes, it did, because when Joe first got sick and everybody rushed in with their concern, while I appreciated the concern, at the same time, it was very exhausting. And then, I needed really to focus on keeping my husband's spirits up and keeping my daughter's life steady. During that period of time, my sister got diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and my mother was getting increasingly ill, and my mother-in-law was aging and getting increasingly frail. And I needed to find those pockets that would rejuvenate my own energy and spirit. So the kind of relentless focus on how's Joe, how's Jill, how's Becky did not help. And I knew it was coming from a really well-intended place, but people were not hearing me when I would say, let's talk about something else. It was difficult. I felt their worry and felt like I had to allay it, and I realized very quickly, early on in Joe's illness, now I can't do that. I was trying to use the hours that I wasn't at the hospital to find, ways to rejuvenate myself so I could go back into his hospital room, bringing ideas and news of the world and whatever back in, because I was the only visitor allowed. So it was imperative to me that I get my mind out of the hospital room when I was out of it and find things to bring to him. And it was very hard to make people understand that.
Okay, now Joe passes away, and 4 months after he dies, you are thinking, do I have to go through this stages of grief thing? What's my life going to be like? And you found a book by Dr. George Bonanno that reassured you that you didn't have to grieve the pattern that was seen.
More important to me, when I discovered Dr. Bonanno's book, up until that point, I kept hearing, friends who were meaning to be supportive were saying things to me like, oh, you're amazing. And to me, that said there was something wrong about my grief. There was something weird about my grief. It wasn't that I wasn't experiencing deep sorrow. It was that I was just very determined to keep moving, to get back to work, to get my daughter out, to just keep our lives moving. So I thought, am I doing this wrong? And in my worst moments, I thought, oh my God, is it possible I didn't love him as much as I thought I did? Which was just, completely unthinkable. So when I came across the other side of sadness, what I discovered was, oh no, I'm totally normal. More than half of all American mourners are what they call resilient. And when I listened to the comments by people in this book, they sounded just like me. And that was a tremendous relief. And what it did was I internalized it as permission to, okay, I'm going to grieve the way I need to. This is what was so fascinating about Bonanno's research was that, and this is over 20 years of study, he found that well over 50% of mourners don't experience stages. That was never the deal. That Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's idea of stages actually had been based on observations of the dying, not the bereaved.
Right.
What Bonanno's research showed is that most people, or resilient people, experience their grief in waves. The mood oscillates, and that even from the very earliest days of grief, while you feel this tremendous sorrow, you can also take a moment to enjoy talking to Gloria and Heidi, and then you go back to your sadness. But you're oscillating in and out of it, and during those moments when you can get out of it, that's what replenishes you. In the earliest months of grief, I totally gravitated to the people who could make me laugh. It was just something I needed. It helped.
You know, the other thing, Heidi, and I wanted to make sure we mentioned was, and talked about a little bit, was depression versus grief.
Lately, I've had a few people lately in my practice, Jill, that have said to me what they were surprised about was they've had deaths of family members. And what surprised them the most is that it feels different than clinical depression because they have a history of clinical depression. And it wasn't that intense 24 hours a day. There were times they were grieving and sad, but there were other times where it was easier to take a break and move out of those areas.
Exactly. I've had 2 clinical depressions in my life. They were both contained episodes. And my biggest concern was exactly that, getting into clinical depression, because I knew if that happened, I would lose myself. And if I did that, I would be of no use initially for my husband when he got sick, and then for my daughter when he died. I did not land up going into depression, and it was different. There was never a minute where I wasn't aware of how sad I was, but I could at the same time, go out and enjoy a walk with a friend or watch a movie and laugh. I was able to get out of my mind, out of my head.
Here's an example. If they walked in the room right now and if they hadn't died and they came in your room, how would you feel? And of course, I'd feel happy. And if you're a depressed person, it's just not that easy to move something in and out. But there was one other thing I noticed when I was thinking about your book, and that is that of all the deaths you had, they were anticipated. And I think that a sudden death, like happened to us, where a 17-year-old gets killed immediately and you get the phone call, it's a little different because there's a physical assault on the body that is very quick. You feel like you've hit a brick wall. You actually lose 5 pounds of water weight within a couple of days because of the adrenaline rush. I mean, there's some physical things that go on that are, pretty horrendous.
I can tell you 2 things in response to that. One that affirms exactly what you're saying. I interviewed George Bonanno for People, and I asked him what might stand in the way of resilience. Did it matter, who you lost, if it was, your parent, your child, your spouse, your sibling, or did age matter? And he said so far in their research, the one variable that would disrupt resilience was a sudden, violent death. So that, speaks exactly to what you just said, Gloria. The flip side, though, is I was talking not that long ago with a widow who lost her husband to a motorcycle accident. And she said she was so grateful he had died quickly and didn't suffer. So I said, well, that's funny because I feel grateful that I had time to, say goodbye to my husband. And what it made me realize is, we all reach for the silver lining, that we have to, because how else are we going to go on?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jill, and it also makes me realize how important a narrative is, because I think when some people, like you said, get stuck in the trauma narrative, and other people rework the narrative and say, at least it was quick, at least they didn't suffer, so that they're not caught up in that trauma narrative.
Right.
That idea that our kids, if they've lost somebody, they absolutely have to have therapy. That's an interesting proposition, because when Scott was killed, I was a therapist, so I had my daughters go into therapy. And Heidi, you want to say something about that?
Well, I'd like to say that while I am a therapist, I definitely do not think that therapy works for everyone. Yes, I did go to a therapist, and for me, it was very unhelpful, because I felt like I was kind of caught in a trauma narrative, and I felt very much at a point in my life where I needed to tell my story, and he wanted me to talk about my childhood. and I really needed to talk about the present and how I was going to not only survive but thrive again. So I found that finding other people who had a loss was what helped move me forward rather than talking to him.
Because you were how old then, Heidi?
I was 20.
But how good for you that you listen to your own instincts. This is one of the things that I think is hardest for bereaved people. I mean, you're already feeling weakened. You're vulnerable. And then people come at you with these messages, and even if they don't feel right, you feel, it's hard to push back and say, no, that doesn't feel right for me.
I also wanted to mention something you said in the book, which I really liked, and that is, well, the difference between your mother at 79, she was ready to die, and Joe's mother at 95 was not ready. I mean, I have to say that made me kind of smile.
Their circumstances were very different. My mother had been on a downward slope for a long time, and she had had enough. My mother-in-law, by contrast, got furious at Joe for suggesting hospice care.
As a baby boomer, what do you suggest for our audience who are baby boomers that are losing their family members and moms and dads and that kind of thing?
I'll tell you what helped with my family. One was that we were very clear about what each of them wished, what their so-called death wishes were, so that we could honor that. We're responsive to and supportive of the decisions they made about what they wanted with their care and a memorial service they want. It might sound macabre, but when you're newly aggrieved, it's actually a great relief to know you're doing exactly what the loved one wanted. And then the other thing was that we all really pulled together. Those of us who survived it, my father, my two brothers, and I, we were able to work together. We coordinated our efforts, and we even had a plan in place for. We didn't know who was going to die first, and we knew my mother would not be able to travel to Anne's funeral. Somebody would have to go to her. So my brothers and I put something in place beforehand, and it unfolded just as we planned it. And it's not that it was a good thing to not be together at that horrible moment, but it helped that we knew what we were going to do. I met the man I married 7 months after Joe died.
Wow,
we just married, a year ago. So we were together.
Right.
3 years before we got married. But his wife of 38 years died 2 months before Joe died. And we were very much on the same page with our grief and about our grief. And it helped us form a very tight bond very quickly. My website is www.jillsmolowe.com. And the book For Funerals and a Wedding are, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your independent bookstores. Thank you, and thank you for letting me come talk with you.
Thanks, Jill. This was a great show.
And thanks, everybody, for listening, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.